The country of Thay was established as a sovereign nation in 922 Dale Reckoning. But in order to understand its history, we need to go back around 2,000 years before that and learn about the man the nation was named after, Thayd. Thayd was an Emissary Artificer. Okay, so first, what is an Emissary Artificer? Now, we need to go back even further. Emissary was a great human empire ruled by powerful spellcasters. It was centered around the Rauran Desert in East Faerûn and lasted from around -8,000 DR all the way until its destruction in -2,488. Anyways, their spellcasters were called Artificers. This isn't like the 5th edition class that makes magic items and tinkers with stuff. They were more similar to the modern day wizard, capable of high-level arcane magic and often researched and created their own spells. They tended to specialize in portal magic, conjuring gates to other worlds, creating new pocket dimensions, and connecting their cities with magic. They also hated the deities and did not worship any gods. In -4,366, they brought in humans, today known as the Mulan ethnic group, from another world to act as their slaves, and they created a divine barrier that prevented the gods of those slaves from answering or hearing prayers on Toril. To get around this, these gods created mortal manifestations of themselves that then sailed through wild space on a magic boat to get to Toril and lead their people out of slavery. This resulted in a war between the Mulani God Kings and the Emissary Artificers, which ultimately destroyed the Emissary Empire and allowed the Mulan to form their own empires of Unther and Mulheron. I'm kind of glossing over all this because this video isn't about Emissary, it's about Thay, which I haven't even gotten to yet, but if you're interested in a video about all of that, let me know, I'd love to research it more. When the Emissary Empire fell in -2,488 DR, Thayd placed himself in a magical stasis in order to survive its destruction. He awoke 1,000 years later to a very different world. His people were gone, the slaves he believed inferior had their own empires, and even worse, these empires were ruled by gods, the very thing the Emissary defied. Priests were valued higher than wizards in their societies, and so Thayd vowed to bring them down and take over this land and people he viewed as his emissary birthright. Thayd began recruiting wizards to his cause, convincing them of their superiority to the priests and their gods, promising them positions of power once they had overthrown the current rulers, and teaching them emissary magic. He layered in the Dragon Sword Mountains, now just called the Sword Mountains, east of Mulheron, and established agents all across the old empires. He selected a handful of elite wizards to bring into his inner circle, and named them Zulkirs, which meant Black Masters in Mulherandi, because of the black garb they wore in imitation of Thayd. He began his Great Rebellion against Mulheron in -1087, assassinating many rulers and military officers. Thayd and his loyalists continued to strike from the shadows for several years, until he was captured and executed by Heshathoth, a high priest of Thoth in -1081. Before I continue with this video, I do want to let you guys know that if you're having trouble following along or you're just a more visual learner, I do have a timeline of Thay you can check out in the description. It's a compilation of existing timelines just sort of mushed into one, as well as adding post-Spellplague events since those original timelines were written before 4th edition. I'll also put the script to this video in the description, and I also just want to give a quick disclaimer on the sources I'm using. I am using official Wizards of the Coast and TSR products, primarily the 1st edition Dreams of the Red Wizards, the 2nd edition Spellbound box set, and the 3rd edition Unapproachable East, as well as some 4th and 5th edition products that have some information. However, I'm also using 2 technically third-party products from the DM's Guild. That is Tyrants and Scarlet and Thay Land of the Red Wizards. Mostly the first one, the second one, Thay Land of Red Wizards, is mostly just for like 1 or 2 pieces of information, but most of the pre-Founding of Thay information is from Tyrants and Scarlet. The reason I am using these and treating them as canon, even though they are technically unofficial, is because they both have Ed Greenwood's name on it, Ed Greenwood being the creator of the Forgotten Realms. Additionally, Tyrants and Scarlet, the one I'm using the most, was also written by George Krashos, who's not only a very big Forgotten Realms fan, but he also has written for official Forgotten Realms products, most notably the Grand History of the Realms. Additionally, these are excellent products that do a good job at not really retconning retconning too many things, but just weaving everything they have into existing lore. And I am treating them as canon since Ed Greenwood treats them as canon. So, Thayd led a failed rebellion 2,000 years before Thay ever seceded. So why did they name their country after him? Well, while he did fail at rebellion and conquest, he didn't fail at weakening the power of Mulhorand, Unther, and their god kings. And isn't that all Red Wizards care about? Getting revenge on those they don't like? You see, secretly, Thayd had built a portal to another world called Adzidar, a barren wasteland teeming with orcs. So official 3rd edition sources say that Thayd himself built this portal, and that he didn't tell anyone about it. However, Tyrants and Scarlet says that his Zulkirs built it after he died in order to get revenge against Mulhorand. Either way, 5 years after his death, in -1076, these orcs from the world of Adzidar began swarming in, as they were enticed by a fertile world ripe with vegetation and resources. They began spreading rapidly and taking territory that belonged to Unther and Mulhorand. This began the Orcgate Wars, where the Grey Orcs of Adzidar called down avatars of the Orcish Pantheon to fight the manifestations of the Untheric and Mulhorandi Pantheons. This war lasted 7 years until the Orcs were defeated and forced to flee north in -1069. Although Unther and Mulhorand won, they were extremely weakened by this Orc invasion, and most of the Untheric Pantheon were killed. This began both their declines, and is the reason that in the modern Forgotten Realms, neither of them are powerful empires anymore, but instead small, weak countries struggling to survive. During the Orcgate Wars, Mulhorand had to hire mercenaries from all over, including the Narfeli and Ramviran tribes. After the war ended, these two tribes formed their own magical empires of Narfel and Ramathar around -900 DR. At various points throughout the centuries, one or the other controlled the Priador Plateau, which is what the Thayan Plateau was called back then. Not much is known about what exactly happened in this region during that time, but we do know that the modern-day Thayan city of Bezentur was originally a Ramviran one named Prianar, at least according to Tyrants and Scarlet, but official Wizards of the Coast sources state that it was actually named Kinston. Either way, during these centuries, Narfel and Ramathar fought over territory ceaselessly until they destroyed each other in an event called the Great Conflagration, lasting from -160 DR to -150. During this, Narfel summoned armies of demons, including the demon lord Eltab, and Ramathar summoned various other creatures, including an avatar of Kasuth, while being sieged in Prianar. The avatar of Kasuth, being a god of fire who cares nothing for human politics and only wants to burn things, destroyed both armies and left their empires defenseless for the demons and monsters to rampage through, destroying both of their civilizations. With the space now unclaimed and free of pressure from these northern nations, Mulhorand and Unther began expanding. Mulhorand settled the areas along the Priador Plateau, and in -135 rebuilt the Ramviran city of Prianar, renaming it Kinston. Also in -135, they claimed this area as one of their provinces. The Mulhorandi called their provinces Precepts, and this precept, which would later become Thay, was named Shamulrand. They also founded other cities that still stand today, like Tyraturos, Amruthar, and Nethjat, although we don't know what year they were founded. Delhumid specifically was founded in -97 and was named the capital of Shamulrand in -59. Now, just a little sideline. Remember when I said that Narfel summoned the demon lord Eltab to fight against Ramathar? Well, Eltab didn't go away. After being summoned in -153 DR to invade Ramathar, he ended up stopping his invasion in Rashomon, as he was fascinated by the nature spirits there and wished to enslave them. So, he conquered Rashomon and ruled it for 72 years. In -75, he was forced to flee by the Rashomon witches, who eventually caught up with him and imprisoned him in the Sharawood. In 106 DR, followers of Merkel discovered him and released him under the condition that he served the Church of Merkel for 99 years. During this time, he helped them conquer the city of southern Chandalar, the one in the Council Hills, not the northern one by Lake Ashani, establishing a Merkelite theocracy and renaming the city Eltabranlar. In 202, Eltab prompted Eltabranlar to invade southern Unther and Mulhorand, as he coveted their power. However, in 204, this invasion failed, and Eltab was imprisoned beneath present-day Thaymount in a demon cyst. A demon cyst being a piece of Eltab's abyssal realm that wound up in the material plane when he was first summoned by the Narfeli. I say all of this because he will come up later. Anyways, let's get back to Thay. As I said previously, Mulhorand claimed the plateau as theirs, creating the Precept of Shamulrand in -135. We don't really have any information about what went on here for the next millennium, so we'll have to fast forward to 860 DR. At this point, Mulhorand has little real authority over the Precept. It's mainly a collection of independent territories, called Tharches, ruled by warlords, called Tharshians. In order to maintain power, these Tharshians had loyal wizards who controlled powerful monsters. Eventually, these wizards began banding together for mutual protection. They called these cabals orders, and insisted they were the divine edicts of Thoth, the Mulhorandi deity of magic. They also claimed anyone who would try to remove or control any of these orders would be cursed, and so the Tharshians tolerated them. Over the years, these various orders fought and slew each other. Mostly because they lusted for power, but also because they were manipulated by various factions, such as gods to expand their influence, rulers of Mulhorand to temper the ambitions of the Tharshians, and various merchant cabals and secret societies who used them to remove people from power. One of these wizard orders was called the Thayd, named after a creature in Mulhorandi folklore that symbolized violent change. In 872 DR, the Thayd were subsumed by a group of archmages from Halrua, exiled from their country for killing rival wizards. Halrua is similar to Thay in that it is a magically powerful country ruled by wizards, but it's thousands of miles away in southwest Faerûn. These Halruan mages were Ethaz Buvar, Jorgmakdon Odessier, Velsharoon Tatragul, and Zingyi Arulath. You might recognize some of these names, as they all played a pivotal role in Thay's founding and have even appeared in various adventures. Velsharoon is actually a god of necromancy these days, and Zingyi conquered most of Damara and Vasa and had Castle Perilous, and a whole series of adventures about him. I find it interesting that these important Thayan figures aren't even from Thay, but a country on the other side of the continent. Anyways, these Halruan mages had control of the Thayd, and took over another order, called the Order of Red Wizards, by mind-controlling their leader, Ulzunder. It was called the Order of the Red Wizards because Ulzunder liked to bathe in the blood of virgins in order to magically extend his lifespan, and so he wore red robes to hide his bloodstains. His followers also took part in these magical experiments, and wore the same colored robes. Using the mind-controlled Ulzunder, the Halruans steered the Order of the Red Wizards towards bringing the Tharshians in his sphere of influence by stoking their ambitions for realms to themselves, and using the Thayd, they could covertly support and protect the Red Wizards. Ulzunder continued to recruit wizards, selecting them carefully for their skill and secrecy, and rewarding them handsomely to ensure their loyalty. With more wizards in the Order, and more Tharshians backing it, the Order of the Red Wizards became the most powerful order in the Precept, and Ulzunder had outlived his usefulness. The Thayd stopped protecting him, and he was slain by rivals in 919 DR. Then, the Thayd, led by the four previously mentioned Halruan mages, revealed themselves to the Order of the Red Wizards and officially took over. In reference to the great wizard Thayd and his rebellion against Mulhorand, they began calling themselves Zulkirs and gathering forces for another revolt. In 922, the Red Wizards, under Ethaz Buvar and the other Zulkirs, seceded from Mulhorand, calling their country Thay, named after Thayd, the first wizard to rebel against the God Kings. They had discovered Eltab imprisoned within Thaymount, and Jorgmakdon tunneled to it and used an ancient Narfeli demon binding ritual to bind him. This shattered the barrier around the demon cyst and created the river Eltar, which flows down from Thaymount into Lake Gagat, which is modern-day Lake Thalambar. They used the bound demon lord to sack Delhumid, the capital of Mulhorandi power in the region, then made their way south, taking cities with ease. Mulhorand responded with a large army, meeting Thay's forces in Thazilhar in what is now known as the Battle of Thazilhar. Although Mulhorand's army was much larger, the Red Wizards were victorious thanks to the power of Eltab. Now that they were independent, their first order of business was to send Eltab back to the Abyss. However, the Narfeli bindings placed on him were so strong, Eltab was unable to be banished, and several wizards died in the process. Realizing this, they instead imprisoned him beneath the river Eltar and built their capital city, Eltabar, named after Eltab of course, on top of it, turning the massive binding sigil into the canals of the city. In 932 DR, Thay conquers the city of Kinston, with the aid of the Kasuthan priests in the city, To honor their help, they renamed the city Bezentur after the first high priest of Kasuth in the city. In 934, the Red Wizards attempt to invade Rashomon via the Gorge of Goros, but they are repelled back by the Wiclaran. After Thay was founded, Ithaz Buvar began to wonder just how they were able to perform such powerful magic to summon and bind a demon lord. He figured they must have tapped into a wellspring of magic, and he and the other Zulkirs began searching for answers. In 941 DR, the year of the sudden sorrows, they found their answer: the Athora. You see, tens of thousands of years ago, there were 3 dominant races on Toril called the Creator Races because they created many of the races that inhabit Toril to this day. These were the reptilian Saruk, the amphibian Batrachi, and the avian Aerie. In -34,000, members of all 3 races formed a secret society dedicated to studying the primitive magic used by various species, and they called themselves the Ba-Atif. They were the ones that created the Nether Scrolls, giving you a glimpse of how powerful their arcane knowledge was. One member of the Ba-Atif, a Saruk named Misashak, discovered a powerful magical artifact while wandering the plains, and brought it back to Abir Toril. It was a twisted mass of black metal the size of a castle, and they secured it in a hidden sanctuary they made for storing magical artifacts. This sanctuary was called Asakath, and was located inside modern-day Thaymount. This artifact radiated extreme amounts of magic, and when Mistra discovered it, she immediately made it a weave anchor and named it Athora, meaning darkness in a now forgotten elder tongue. She also defended it with the weave, masking it from divinations and causing any spell cast at it to reflect back. The presence of the Athora suffused the surrounding lands with magic, increasing the chances that people born here possess the gift to wield magic, which is why there are so many more wizards in Thay when compared to the rest of the world. It also allowed for great works of spellcraft to be possible, such as the creation of the Orcgate, the summoning of an avatar of Kasuth by the Ramathari, and the binding of the demon lord Eltab. When the Zulkirs discovered it in 941, they attempted to break off parts of it to carry on their person in order to empower all their spells. In doing so, they had to cast powerful spells at the Athora to break it, which then reflected back thanks to Mistra's protection. This collapsed the cavern, buried the Athora, and killed over 20 powerful wizards, including Jorg Magdon. Ithaz survived thanks to a contingency spell that teleported him away, but the magical backlash triggered his transformation to lichdom and accelerated it so much that he had become an insane demi-lich within mere months. He still exists today underneath Bezentur, and schemes to enact vengeance on Thayans who do not honor his memory. Velsharoon and Zingi survived but were severely injured, giving Tarloth Narmandur the opportunity to attack them, forcing them to flee, leaving Thay without any leaders. Okay, so who is Tarloth Narmandur? Well, he's a more important figure in Thayan history than you might realize. He was another powerful wizard in the area, but unlike the 4 Zulkirs previously mentioned, who were from Halrua, Tarloth was actually born in the area that would become Thay, on a farm near modern-day Zalem, sometime around -1000 DR, decades before the Orcgate Wars. He joined the Azure Lions adventuring band where he learned wizardry. The band was later destroyed by Mulhuron for tomb robbing, and then Tarloth fled north and was recruited by Thayd as one of his Zulkirs, aiding in the creation of the Orcgate. After Thayd's Great Rebellion failed, Tarloth spent his time taking on many identities, one of which was a disciple of Horus Ray, in which he stole and drank some of the Khaladshran, an elixir of immortality created from Ray's divine blood, reserved for each incarnation of Horus Ray upon their coronation. With this longevity, he dedicated the following centuries studying magic and learning the secret of lichdom from the Lich Charchi. When the country of Thay began to develop in the early 900s, he started killing powerful red wizards to create a power vacuum, so that he could step in and rule Thay himself. I promise you all of this is important. This leads us to where we left off in 941 DR, where Tarloth attacked the surviving Zulkirs, forcing them to flee. With no clear leader in place, chaos erupted as red wizards vied for power and slew each other. Tarloth used this to take out any wizard he deemed a potential threat to his rule, and this chaos continued for several decades. Eventually, even 2 organizations from West Faerûn got involved, the Covenant and the Harpers, preventing the plans of wizards from negatively affecting the North and the Heartlands. Also during this time, in 955 DR, Red wizards magically transport an orc horde from the spine of the World Mountains to the lands of the Old Empires, wreaking much devastation throughout the south. During this span of time between 941 and 1030, the country was essentially composed of dozens of petty kingdoms, each ruled by different wizards that seldom worked together, although they were still able to repel a Mulhorandi invasion in 976. The chaos and death toll was so great that the gods Mistra and Azuth got involved, as they were disappointed at the deaths of so many promising wizards and their wanton use of the art. In 1030 DR, the Red Wizard Escalthar, being manipulated by Azuth, rose above all others and summoned the Red Wizards to the Council of Black Stars, named after Escalthar's mage sigil, a black star. He proposed the concept of the Zulkirate, where 8 Zulkirs, each a master of a different school of magic, would rule as one council. Escalthar also proposed the role of the Ustakir, meaning Master of Thrones in Mulhorandi, Kir meaning Master and Usta meaning Throne, who would control the Zulkirs' thrones and ensure sanctity during their meetings. Several wizards disliked the Zulkirate proposal, and at least one was subjected to Escalthar's everlasting curse when he attacked him, which caused the attacker's body to shapeshift over and over until they died. If you want 5th edition stats for a spell similar to this, but legally distinct, I have one on my Patreon that you can check out in the description. Begrudgingly, the Red Wizards accepted the new form of government. 8 Red Wizards volunteered to become Zulkirs, and Escalthar named himself Ustakir. He even gained their trust by opening his mind to mind-reading spells, in which he was shielded by Azuth. The position of Ustakir seems to be solely from the DM's Guild book Tyrants and Scarlet, as I can't find it mentioned anywhere else or in any official TSR Wizards of the Coast product. So whether this position still exists in Thay, I can't say, but since it's literally never mentioned after this event, I'd have to guess no. To me, it seems that Azuth made the position to scare the Zulkirs into cooperating. Now that they have formed their own country and system of government, I could see him no longer feeling the need to keep it around and just letting the Ustakir position go away. Either that, or the Zulkirs eventually got tired of having someone over them and they just killed him and never replaced him. Tarloth Narmandur had not foreseen the formation of the Zulkirate, which obviously threw a wrench in his plans to rule Thay. So, he secretly supported the renegade wizards who opposed the Zulkirs. Even though they were aided by Tarloth and outnumbered the Zulkirate's followers, they made little progress. Tarloth attempted to kill Escalthar, but the wizard drew on the power of the Athora to survive and severely injured Tarloth. It specifically says that Escalthar survives this, however 2 years later in 1032, a new Ustakir of Thay is selected, so I don't actually know what happened to Escalthar. Tarloth withdrew into hiding, biding his time while he tried to learn the Ustakir's secrets. After 50 years of civil war, the last of the renegades were slain in 1074 DR, and Thay was completely under the control of the Zulkirate. Tarloth now had to form a new strategy to conquer Thay, so using his identity-stealing tactics, he took on the guise of Zaz-Tam. Yes, that Zaz-Tam. Zaz-Tam's real name is Tarloth Narmandur, and he is much older than the history books say. Once again, this lore is from Tyrants and Scarlet and isn't technically official lore. According to official Thayan history, Zaz-Tam was born in 1104 and achieved lichdom in 1159. How he came about the identity of Zaz-Tam isn't explained, but considering the Tam family is a prominent noble family in Thay, it seems likely Zaz-Tam was a real person who Tarloth killed and took the identity of. It would make sense since he would already be a person of nobility and political influence, making his bids to Zulkirdom feasible. So, in 1074, Thay's government was solidified as the Council of Zulkirs, where 8 Zulkirs, each a powerful wizard of a different school of magic, rule the entire country. Beneath them are the Tharshians, each governing a territory called a Tharch within the country. With the nation relatively stable, the Red Wizards begin an era of conquest to fulfill their dreams of making Thay a vast empire spanning Faerûn. However, they had no unified military or leader. They were governed by 8 evil people, each with an equal amount of power, plus the 11 Tharshians, all of which had their own private armies. This often meant that they constantly schemed to thwart the plans of others to raise themselves up, causing most of their invasions to fail. So, let's look at the next 3 centuries of Thay's history, most of which involve their conquests. In 1086, Thay captures Nethjet and Nethantir, extending the Tharsh of Lependrar. In 1110, Thay marches on the Theskian city Fint, but the combined forces of Impilturan and Theskian cities defeat the Red Wizard's army. In 1157, Zaz-Tam becomes the Zulkir of Necromancy by slaying the previous one, Nyresa Flass. In 1194, the Zulkirs launch their first invasion of Aglarond, but are defeated in the Battle of Singing Sands. In 1197, the Thayans attack Aglarond again and are driven back at the Battle of Broken Heads. In 1201, Thay invades Aglarond a third time, however this one we actually do get some detail on. It was launched by the Zulkir of Invocation, Narvana Kryn, the Zulkir of Illusion, Nymor Thrul, and the Zulkir of Necromancy, Zaz-Tam. Zaz-Tam's zombies would perform a feint at the Watch Wall, while the other two's armies would infiltrate the Yearwood. It went well at first, but the undisciplined armies spent too long pillaging local villages and lost the element of surprise. Nymor blames Zaz-Tam for his losses, and Tam accused Nymor's soldiers of incompetence and cowardice. This ended with Tam killing Nymor with a suffocate spell, leaving his army to fall back in confusion and Kryn's army unsupported, causing the invasion to fail. In 1260, Halakar, the ruler of Aglarond, launches an invasion of Thay, advancing along the Lependrar. However, it fails catastrophically as the Red Wizards destroy his army in what is now called the Battle of Lependrar. In 1280, the Zulkirs launch an invasion of Mulhorand that ravages Murgam and the northern districts of that land. In 1344, the Red Wizard Samus Kul arranges the concession of a small Thayan quarter in the city of Procamper, creating the first of the Thayan enclaves. In 1357, Hargrid Tinslayer, Tharshian of Lependrar, and the Zulkirs of Evocation and Conjuration plot a campaign against the coastal cities of Thassalon, Murbant, Escalante, Tascont, Lasder, and Tilbrand, most of which were colonies of Unther that had seceded and become independent in the 600s. They made a deal with two powerful figures on the Plane of Fire, Phizar, the Lord of the Salamanders, and Sultan Muraik of the Ifrit. In exchange for their military support, the Red Wizards would create a permanent gate to the elemental Plane of Fire, setting the entire coast ablaze and giving the elementals a permanent place on Faerûn. They accepted, and the campaign was successful. However, the Red Wizards never intended on honoring their end of the deal, and instead were going to banish the elementals once they were through. However, after conquering or destroying most of the cities, the Salamanders and Ifrit demanded the gate be made immediately. Forced into premature action, the wizards attempted to banish them, but were only able to successfully banish the Ifrit, leaving the Salamanders to ravage the Priador in retaliation. They got aid from Zaz-Tam, who retreated his undead armies from an invasion of Rashomon to aid in this conflict, now called the Salamander War. After a year of fighting, it ended when Asnar Thrul, an up-and-coming Red Wizard, successfully requested Kasuth, the god of fire, to come and wipe the Salamanders out. This caused Kasuth's worship to skyrocket in Thay. The Thayans had to withdraw from Lasder and Tascont and controlled Tilbrand in name only, but maintained full control over the other coastal cities. They were reorganized into a new Tharsh called Priador, taking some land from the Tharsh of Lependrar and completely absorbing the old Tharsh of Bezentur. The Tharshianess of Bezentur, Marie Agna, laid claim to being the Tharshianess of this new Tharsh, but was contested by Asnar Thrul. They dueled, Asnar won, reducing her to a mindless slave, and he ruled with an iron fist, exploiting, enslaving, raiding, and killing people in the area. In 1359, shortly after the Salamander War, came the Tweegan invasion. The Tweegan people, tribes of horse nomads from the Endless Waste to the east, were united under the leader Yamun Kahan, who invaded the west. The general Batu Minho led 4,000 warriors into Thay, meeting the Thayan army at Shar's Pass, several miles north of Pyarados. With Thay's fate in danger, Zaz-Tam offered the Tweegan horde a truce. He agreed to provide military assistance to a Tweegan invasion of Rashomon, as long as the horde left Thay, which the Tweegan accepted. In 1360, the Tweegan are almost destroyed in Rashomon, and the Red Wizards part Lake Ashani to allow them to cross and invade Thesk instead. Eventually, the horde is wiped out by a coalition of other nations. In 1362, Thay attempts to invade Rashomon via the Golden Way through Thesk, but are driven off by water elementals summoned by the witches. In 1365, Thay invades Rashomon again. This time, the Red Wizards melted glaciers in the Ice Rim Mountains to cause immense flooding in Emilmar and Molsentir. While the Rashomar were distracted, Thay crossed forces through the foothills of the High Country, but were driven back by elementals. In 1367, Zastam realizes Eltab will soon break free from his prison beneath Eltabar. So, instead of letting that happen, he deliberately releases the Lord of the Hidden Layer and uses the Death Moon Orb to compel Eltab to sit in Thekorsel's seat. While here, Zaz's plan was to cast the spell known as the Ritual of Twin Burnings to permanently bind Eltab to his will. But before Zaz could weave all 9 runes of chaos, a group of adventurers thwarted this plan, giving Eltab a chance to escape to the demon cyst below Thaymount where he could recover his strength. In 1368, Thay places trade enclaves in Simbar, Phesanth, Prosker, and Surlagul and begin ramping up magic item production for export, working their way towards becoming a mercantile powerhouse. In the same year, they invade Rashomon again. They ignite the western portion of the Ashenwood, forcing foul creatures to migrate into more civilized areas. During the chaos, they teleport assassins into Emilmar and Molcentir to kill important Rashomar, but they are defeated by berserkers. Also in 1368, Ithaz Buvar, one of the founding Zulkirs of the country, now a demi-lich living underneath Bezentur, sends out his undead minions to try and find a mortal body he can possess. However, every attempt resulted in the mortal dying of fright or other causes before he could inhabit them. In 1369, Thay attacks Aglarond in the winter. A vast army of undead crosses the frozen Umber Marshes, but fail to overcome the Watchwall. In 1370, the Red Wizards withdraw from the Umber Marshes, but the remaining undead, now free from wizard control, claw out of the swamp and wander the Watchwall. The same year, Thay invades Rashomon across Lake Molcentir on magic boats, but they are destroyed by a witch-conjured storm. In 1371, Mulhuran launches an invasion of Unther, and the Red Wizards begin to funnel gold and magic into Unther to oppose the Mulhurandi conquest. In the same year, the Zulkirs offer a truce to Aglarond, which the symbol accepts, and they assassinate Thydrim Yavarg, the Iron Lord of Rashomon. In 1372, a Thayan emissary travels to Rashomon to ask to establish an enclave. She is refused, but allowed to leave safely. In 1373, Eltab comes out of hiding and confronts Zastam. However, he is defeated in battle by Thazien Uskevrin, a thief and former slave. Because of the powerful Narfeli bindings cast on Eltab, instead of being destroyed, he was transported to the Citadel of Conjurers beneath Impilter. In 1375, Zastam begins his vie for power. Azir Kryn, the Tharshianus of Goros, and Homan Odessirin, the Tharshian of Surthay, begin an invasion of Rashomon, but Zastam reveals this to the Rashomar, giving them time to prepare and defeat the Thayan army. During this, Zastam comes to the rescue, saves the Thayans, and then spins the failure in their favor, earning Azir and Homan's loyalty. Zaz also has several Zulkirs assassinated, and armies of undead attack Thay from the Sunrise Mountains, all to create a climate of fear and disorder within Thay that he could step in and solve. It's all an attempt to convince the common people that they are only safe under Zastam's single rule. Then, he comes to the Council of Zulkirs requesting he be made Regent of Thay temporarily until he can bring order to chaos. They all oppose this decision, and the people of Eltabar, the capital city, begin to riot as they supported Zastam. Then, Zastam gathers his army of undead, loyal Red Wizards, and the armies of Goros and Surthay, and begin a war against the other Zulkirs in what is called the War of the Zulkirs. According to the movie Honor Among Thieves, Zaz started his coup by interrupting Demetra Flass, the Zulkir of Illusion, during a speech he gave to the people of Thaymount during a solstice celebration. He then pulled out the Horn of Beckoning Death and used it to kill the common folk and turn them into an undead army he could use for his coup. This account is inconsistent with what I previously said, since it has his betrayal happening at the Citadel in Thaymount rather than Eltabar, so it's assumed this is a case of unreliable narrator. I don't think this is unreasonable, since the narrator, Zenkiendar, is telling the story from the traumatic memory of watching his parents die over a century ago, and the book he references was most likely written over a century after the event, so I think it's fair to say that this is unreliable and probably not completely true. The War of the Zulkirs drags on for a decade, and by 1385, the Year of Blue Fire, Zaz controlled the northern Tharches of Goros, Lepindrar, Surthay, Delhumid, and Thaymount, while the other Zulkirs maintained a hold over Priador, Eltabar, Tyraturos, Thazalhar, and Pyodados, and the islands of Aleor. On Tarsak 29, Zaz attacks the Keep of Sorrows with giant powerful undead accompanying his army. However, during the battle, the goddess of magic, Mystra, is killed, beginning an event called the Spellplague. I'm going to assume if you're a Forgotten Realms fan, you probably already know what this is, but essentially, magical blue fire swept through the entire planet, causing much destruction and extended into the outer planes where many gods were killed. The planet Abir, which exists in the same space as Toril but in a pocket dimension, began fusing back with Toril, causing entire nations to be swapped out with ones from Abir. Additionally, for the first 10 years, arcane magic ceased to function properly, causing wizards to be unable to cast spells, or causing their spells to malfunction and sometimes kill themselves. Out of universe, the Spellplague delineated the transition from 3rd to 4th edition. Also, the entire Thayan Plateau was elevated thousands of feet higher, causing much geographical destruction. But all post-Sundering 5th edition sources seem to kind of ignore this, and it isn't ever mentioned again. Even the 4th edition novel trilogy about this war, the Haunted Lands trilogy, never actually mentions this part, so it's unclear if it's actually canon. Eventually, Zastam summoned Bane, the god of tyranny. Bane was impressed by his boldness of summoning a god, and decided to strike a deal. Bane would give Zastam insight on how to use this newly changed magic, allowing him to cast spells without malfunctioning, and give him a temporary boost in magical might, under the condition that his soul belonged to Bane after 1,000 years, and that no gods other than Bane would be legally allowed to be worshipped in Thay. Using his newfound power, Zaz was able to win the war, forcing the Zulkirs to flee to Escalante in the Wizard's Reach. Right around this time, Zaz also got his hands on a tome that contained the Ritual of Unmaking, an ancient ritual that would allow one to destroy the entire universe and remake it however the caster wished, potentially even making himself a god over everything. At least that's what the ritual was supposed to do, however most people doubted it was actually possible. Still, an evil lich could probably use the knowledge from this book to gain a lot of power. Not much is officially known about this tome, not even its name, except for that it is bound in red and was pinned at the dawn of time, and was discovered by a man named Fastrin the Delver millennia ago. However, I did do a homebrew lore write-up on the tome, The Ritual of Unmaking, and Fastrin the Delver, which you see on screen right here, and you can find the full document linked in the description for free. So, for the next century after the Spellplague, Zaz would focus on constructing dread rings, giant fortresses that served as foci for the arcane power required for the Ritual of Unmaking. During this century, from 1385 to around 1480, in addition to Zastam making the dread rings, he also steered the wizard culture towards undeath. More and more wizards began embracing lichdom, vampirism, and other forms of powerful undeath, and all members of the Council of Zulkirs were liches. During the Spellplague, since the ruling wizard class could no longer cast spells, many slaves used this opportunity to revolt and kill their masters, aided by various merchants, nobles, and wizard rivals who wished to see the Red Wizards put in their place. This created a growing fear of having too many living slaves, and over the next century, it became more common to use undead in lieu of slaves, making living slaves much rarer to find. This event was called the Lar Air, which meant big change or new direction in life. In 1432, Thay launched an attack against Aglarond, successfully conquering the fortress Immic. They used an invasion force of soldiers, golems, and undead to distract the Aglarondans, then sent a strike force inside to disable the magical wards that prevented teleportation. This allowed Thayd to teleport hundreds of lesser red wizards inside the walls. Thay successfully conquers Immic, but it costs hundreds of wizards, thousands of soldiers, and tens of thousands of undead, curbing Zaz's ambition to invade more of Aglarond for decades. Zaz appoints his loyal apprentice Undamora as the governor of Immic. In 1451, Red Wizards, led by Silora Psalm, build a new dread ring in Neverwinter Wood, and awaken the fire primordial Majera within Gauntlgrim underneath Mount Hodenau. They wanted Majera to rampage, and then use the death and destruction to empower the dread ring. This caused Mount Hodenau to erupt, destroying Neverwinter. In 1462, this plan was thwarted when Dritz Do'Urden and his allies sealed Majera, cutting off the dread ring from its power. Around 1463, the Elf Lich and former member of the Arcane Brotherhood of Luskan, Valendra Shadowmantle, began working for Zastam, acting as his agent outside of Thay and working to restore the Dread Ring in Neverwinter Wood, or if that failed, use the power within it to create a Draco Lich from the corpse of the dragon Lorigoth. In 1466, Undamora, the governor of Immic, is disintegrated by the Simbarch Council of Aglarond. Zaz is infuriated he could not find enough pieces to resurrect her, many believe he wanted her as a consort, and renames Immic to Undamore in her honor. In 1478, the exiled Zulkirs, along with the bard Barreras Onscold, whose lover was killed by Zaz Tam, are convinced by Eoth Fezum to accompany him and his mercenary company, the Brotherhood of the Griffin, into Thay in order to stop Zaz Tam's ritual of unmaking from destroying the universe. Although they didn't believe the ritual would actually work, they were convinced that it would still probably kill most people within and around the lands of Thay, so they accept. Zaz Tam's ritual actually gets hijacked by an Order of the Long Death monk, Zulkir, and right-hand man to Zaz Tam named Malark Springhill, who wishes to simply destroy the entire universe but not remake it, as this aligned with his Long Death philosophy, believing this to be the perfect death. The Zulkirs end up teaming up with Zaz Tam to stop him. After Malark is killed, the Zulkirs and Barreras take this opportunity to kill Zaz Tam for revenge. This goes terribly for them, as Zaz Tam easily kills all of them except for Eoth, who escapes. However, since the ritual was attempted but failed, the Dread Rings in Thay are now useless. Those Dread Rings and the region of Thay can never be used for the ritual of unmaking again. In 1479, Valindra Shadowmantle's plan to restore the Neverwinter Wood Dread Ring fails, as the Dread Ring is destroyed by a coalition of Thay's enemies, and Valindra's body is killed by adventurers, sending her soul back to her phylactery. In the years of 1482 to 1487, the Second Sundering occurs, the event where Lord Ao, the overgod of realm space, separated Abir from Toril, ending most of the consequences of the Spellplague. Out of universe, the Second Sundering delineated the transition from 4th to 5th edition, and it gave the writers a way to revert most of the changes made in 4th edition, as most of the fanbase absolutely despised those, even if said reversion didn't really make any sense and felt more like a retcon. The current power structures of Toril were challenged and shifted. Many gods came back to life, Bane had been significantly weakened, and Zaz's Dread Ring plan had failed. To quote Ed Greenwood, the creator of the Forgotten Realms, Zaz Tam's confidence and worldview were rocked by the Second Sundering, and he walked the paths of the doomed alone, pondering if he was going about things in the right way. End quote. Zaz Tam realized a few things during this event. One is that having a council of all liches that are controlled by him creates a council of yes-men that say whatever he wants to hear, leading to stagnation. He removed several of these Zulkirs and replaced them with living people, people who aren't afraid to challenge his ideas. The Sword Coast Adventurer's Guide says that the change to more living wizards is a result of his recent battles with the demon Eltab, but that doesn't make any sense at all since his most recent battle with Eltab was over a century ago in 1372, and I don't really know why fighting Eltab would change his opinions on undead Zulkirs, so I'm gonna assume that this is incorrect. Additionally, Zaz Tam lifted the ban on worshipping gods other than Bane, because he received visions that told him to, quote, "Let all the temples breathe and be open. For when the tyrant grip is too tight, all that can be seen is the way of Bane, and one may miss other thought, other plans, and other troubles brewing." End quote. Sometime between 1488 and 1492, as the exact year is never stated, Zaz Tam sends Valindra Shadowmantle to Cholt to study the Soulmonger, a powerful magical artifact created by Acererak that could capture souls of anyone who died on Toril. She was tasked to harness its power, or if that proved impossible, to destroy it. It eventually was destroyed by a group of adventurers, and she returned to Thay, where Zaz Tam rewarded her service by making her the new Zulkir of Necromancy. At least according to Ed Greenwood's book, Thay, Land of the Red Wizards. See, this book assumes that Zaz rules over the other 8 Zulkirs, while he himself is not a Zulkir, but a separate higher title called Regent. However, official Wizards of the Coast sources, including 4th edition's Forgotten Realms Campaign Guide and the new 5.5 edition Adventures in Faerûn, state that Zaz rules Thay along with 7 other Zulkirs, which implies he is still the Zulkir of Necromancy, he's just above the other Zulkirs, in which case Valindra couldn't be the Zulkir of Necromancy. Although, also in Ed Greenwood's book, the Zulkir of Enchantment spot is empty, and there actually are only 7 Zulkirs. So maybe it's actually consistent with that. But it says 7 other Zulkirs, and I feel like other sort of implies that Zaz is one of them. I don't know, you can interpret it a lot of ways, but I tend to lean toward Ed Greenwood's word as being canon over anything Wizards of the Coast puts out, because it's obvious Ed cares way more about the lore and having it make sense than Wizards of the Coast, so I'm gonna go with one of those. Sometime in the late 1490s, as an exact year is never given, Zastam sends the Red Wizard Lich Sophina to Neverwinter, where she manipulates a band of thieves into stealing the Horn of Beckoning Death from the Harpers, establishes one of them as Lord of Neverwinter, and uses his power to bring back the High Sun Games, a gladiator-type blood sport. This would bring in a large crowd of people to one location in the city, allowing her to use the Horde of Beckoning Death, turning them all into zombies. This is all shown in the movie Honor Among Thieves. It's unclear why exactly she did this and what Zastam would gain from having an army of undead 3,000 miles away from Thay, but if I had to guess, I'd say it's related to the Dread Ring in Neverwinter Wood, even though it was supposedly destroyed. It just seems unlikely he chose Neverwinter as a coincidence. Man, if I had $1 every time Zastam attempted to kill large numbers of people in Neverwinter, I would have $3, which isn't a lot, but it's weird that it happened 3 separate times, considering the vast distance between these two countries. Although I think there is like a Shadowfell road that speeds it up. Anyway, where is Thay now? As of writing this video, the current year in the Forgotten Realms is 1501 DR, the year of the Shining Mythal. As of now, Thay is still ruled by Zastam, his Zulkirs beneath him, and the 11 Tharshians beneath the Zulkirs. However, it seems that the various rulers of Thay have a lot of leeway and independence as long as they don't piss off Zastam. Additionally, Thay is still invading Rashomon and Aglarond around once a decade or so, and border raids are constant. But yeah, that is the history of Thay and how it came to be and every piece of information I could possibly find on it. And if I missed something, let me know because I'd love to know what I missed. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. I really hope you guys enjoyed it and all the work I put into it. And remember to subscribe for more D&D related content.